In December 1962, in a grand hall in Stockholm, three men stood to accept the Nobel Prize for one of the most important discoveries in the history of science, the molecular structure of DNA. Not one of them spoke her name. She had been dead for 4 years by then, but even the rules of the prize itself would very likely have kept her off that stage regardless. It wasn't a rule that decided how this story would be told, though. To understand that, we have to go back 9 years, to a small lab in London and a photograph almost nobody outside it was ever supposed to see. In January 1951, a 30-year-old chemist named Rosalind Franklin arrived at King's College London to lead a new project using X-ray crystallography to determine the physical structure of a molecule almost nobody outside a small circle of scientists had heard of. It was called deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. She had spent 3 years in Paris mastering X-ray diffraction techniques few scientists in Britain could match. She arrived expecting to lead the DNA research effort largely on her own. But the lab director, John Randall, had already given a colleague named Maurice Wilkins a different impression, that he'd be the one guiding the work, with Franklin assisting. Nobody had cleared that up before she walked in the door. The friction started almost immediately, and the institution around her did nothing to resolve it. At King's, the senior common rooms were still segregated by sex, men in one, women in another. She was the only woman doing serious crystallography work in her section, walking into a scientific culture that hadn't yet decided whether she fully belonged in the room where the real conversations happened. The ambiguity in Randall's instructions wasn't an accident of poor communication. It was a reflection of an institution that assumed the man would naturally take the lead, and that the woman would fall in behind him, whether or not that's what she'd been promised. Whatever the politics around her, her actual science was close to flawless. She refined the X-ray camera setup with a precision few labs in the world could match, controlling humidity levels down to fractions of a percent to keep the DNA fibers stable enough to photograph clearly. She discovered that DNA existed in 2 distinct physical forms depending on moisture, a finding that would later prove essential to solving the whole structure. The A form was dry, compact, crystalline. The B form was wet, longer, and more diffuse, and it was the one that would eventually reveal the secret. In May 1952, working with her graduate student Raymond Gosling, she captured an image that would later be called one of the most important photographs ever taken in science. It showed the diffraction pattern of DNA's B form with a clarity nobody had achieved before. Decades later, scientists would still refer to it simply as Photo 51. The X-shaped pattern in the center, the distinct layer lines, the spacing of the spots. It was a roadmap to the molecule's structure, printed in black and white on a single sheet of film. But she didn't recognize it as that yet. Not fully. She was methodical, and methodical meant not jumping to conclusions. Through the second half of 1952, she kept working, not guessing, calculating. Using the mathematics of crystallography, she determined that the molecule's phosphate backbone sat on the outside of the structure with the bases folded inward. That single conclusion would turn out to be one of the central pillars of the entire DNA model. She was, step by careful step, building the solution from the ground up. Her notebooks show the logic chain clearly, the symmetry patterns, the density calculations, the spacing of the atoms. The answer was taking shape in her own handwriting, months before anyone else saw it. By January of 1953, her notebooks, examined decades later by her colleague Aaron Klug, show she had gone further still. She'd identified the crystal's symmetry pattern and started connecting it to another scientist's data on how the molecule's chemical building blocks paired together. She was closing in on the full answer through her own careful method, one confirmed step at a time. She had also, by this point, already accepted a position at a different institution, Birkbeck College, planning to leave King's behind for a fresh start on a different problem entirely. She was packing up her office, archiving her data, preparing to move on. The answer was sitting in those notebooks, but she was also looking away. She never got the chance to finish reaching that conclusion on her own terms. In late January 1953, Maurice Wilkins, without asking her and without her knowledge, showed photo 51 to a visiting scientist from Cambridge named James Watson. Watson later wrote that the moment he saw it, his pulse began to race. He understood immediately what the pattern meant. Around the same time, a separate breach happened through a separate channel. Max Perutz, a senior scientist at the Medical Research Council, passed an internal report containing her unpublished data directly to Watson's research partner, Francis Crick. Neither handoff had gone through her. The data she had spent 2 years producing was now in the hands of her competitors, and she had no idea. Here is the question her own archived notebooks leave sitting unanswered, the one almost no retelling of this story stops to ask. Not what was taken from her, but whether she had any idea in those final weeks at King's how close she actually already was. Whether the answer everyone remembers Watson and Crick reaching first was, in her own careful hands, perhaps only weeks away. Her notebooks show the logic chain, they show the calculations, they show the structure almost complete. But they don't show her reaction. They don't show whether she knew. Within days of seeing her data, Watson and Crick built a physical model of the structure. By the 28th of February, 1953, they believed they had it. A double helix, 2 strands winding around each other, held together by paired bases in the center. The backbone on the outside, exactly where her own calculations had already placed it. The model they built was based on her photograph and her unpublished data. It was her work, arranged into a shape that would make them famous. She was not consulted. She was not informed. She was simply bypassed. On the 25th of April, 1953, the journal Nature published 3 papers together. Watson and Crick's model ran first, presented as the discovery. Her paper, with Gosling, ran last, cast in the language of supporting evidence, not foundation. The order on the page was a decision, and the decision wasn't hers. She never objected publicly. She was already focused on her new work at Birkbeck. But the order of those papers, the placement of her name at the end of the line, told the scientific community who was supposed to get the credit. And it wasn't her. She left for Birkbeck College that same year, and by every account, she thrived there, turning her attention to the structure of viruses, including tobacco mosaic virus and polio, producing work respected across the international scientific community in its own right. She found a place where her expertise was valued, where she wasn't fighting her own institution for the right to be heard. The betrayal of King's didn't define her career. It was simply a door that closed, and she walked through another one. In an odd, quiet turn most people never hear about, her relationship with Crick himself grew genuinely warm in the years that followed. When she became seriously ill, she stayed at his home during her treatment. Whatever bitterness existed around the DNA work, it apparently wasn't between the two of them, not by the end. She didn't hold the betrayal against the man who'd built the model on her data. She reserved that silence for the institution that had enabled it. In 1958, Rosalind Franklin died of ovarian cancer. She was 37 years old. Some historians believe her prolonged exposure to X-ray radiation throughout her career may have contributed to the disease that killed her. The same technology that allowed her to see the structure of DNA may have also shortened her life. She never knew how close she'd actually come, or if she did, she took that knowledge with her. 4 years later, the Nobel Prize for the discovery of DNA structure went to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. She wasn't included. The prize cannot be awarded after death, and even setting that rule aside, it cannot be split more than 3 ways. Both facts were true. Neither one was really the reason her name went unspoken in that hall. The prize didn't exclude her because she was dead. It excluded her because the narrative had already been written, and in that narrative, she was never meant to be the lead. In 1968, Watson published a memoir describing the DNA discovery, and his portrait of her was dismissive, more focused on her appearance and manner than her science. For decades, that book shaped how the public understood her role, or rather, failed to. It took her own colleague, working carefully back through her actual notebooks years later, to show what the record had said all along. Aaron Klug, her friend and scientific partner, spent years reconstructing her work. He proved, in her own careful handwriting, exactly how close she had already come, on her own, before anyone else ever saw what she'd found. She never got to stand in that hall in Stockholm, but the notebooks she left behind did something the ceremony couldn't undo. They proved, in her own careful handwriting, exactly how close she had already come, on her own, before anyone else ever saw what she'd found. Her name doesn't appear on the Nobel Prize, but it appears on every honest account of how the double helix was actually discovered, and that, in the end, is the version that survives.